Life has a very interesting way of surprising us. When we are young, we say, I want independence. But when we grow old, sometimes independence becomes loneliness, and we start saying, I wish someone was here. But let me gently offer a different lens today. What if living alone in your 80s is not a punishment, but a privileged invitation to rediscover yourself? 1. When silence becomes a teacher, not a threat. Life has a very interesting way of teaching us lessons when we least expect them. In our younger days, we often chase noise, success, responsibilities, and relationships. But in the evening of life, especially in the 80s, life gently removes the noise and introduces us to something far more profound: silence. There was an 82-year-old woman named Myra living in a quiet neighborhood in Pune. After her husband passed away and her children moved abroad, she began living alone. The first few months were extremely difficult for her. She said her house felt like a museum of memories. The ticking clock sounded louder than ever, and even the smallest sounds made her feel uneasy. She would switch on the television just to feel that someone was there. But something slowly began to change. One morning, she sat by her window with a cup of tea and noticed the birds outside. For the first time, she did not turn on the television. She just observed. Days passed, and she began repeating this small practice. Sitting in silence, observing nature, listening to the wind, and slowly becoming comfortable with her own company. She later shared something very powerful with a visitor. She said, At first, I feared silence. I thought it was loneliness knocking at my door. But now I realize silence is not empty. It is full of answers. This is the shift that many of us miss. We assume silence is the absence of life. But in reality, silence is the presence of awareness. When there is no external distraction, the internal world begins to speak. In spiritual understanding, silence is not loneliness, it is an invitation. It invites you to meet yourself again without masks, without roles, without expectations. In silence, you are no longer a parent, a worker, or a caregiver. You are simply you. For Mira, silence became a teacher. It taught her patience. It taught her observation. It taught her acceptance. Most importantly, it taught her that she was not alone, because her own consciousness was enough company. In our modern world, we fear silence because it forces reflection. But reflection is where healing begins. When life becomes quiet, the soul finally gets a chance to speak. So, in the journey of living alone in your 80s, silence is not your enemy. It is your greatest companion, gently guiding you back to yourself. Many people discover that in silence they begin to notice their breathing more clearly, their thoughts more gently, and their emotions more honestly. It becomes like sitting beside an old friend who does not interrupt but only listens. And in that listening, life feels lighter, softer, and more meaningful again. And when you stay with it long enough, you realize silence was never outside you, it was always within you waiting to be noticed. 2. Loneliness or solitude, the inner choice that changes everything. There is a very thin line between loneliness and solitude, yet that line decides whether your old age feels like suffering or spiritual growth. Loneliness says, I am alone and I am incomplete. Solitude says, I am alone and I am enough. And the difference is not in your house, not in your family, not even in your circumstances. The difference is in how you interpret your own company. Let me share a story. There was a retired school teacher named Mr. Raman. He had spent his entire life teaching children, guiding students, and living a very structured social life. After retirement, and later after the passing of his wife, his home became unusually quiet. At first, he struggled deeply. Every morning felt heavy. He would sit on his old chair near the window, staring at nothing in particular. The silence of the house felt like a loud reminder of everything he had lost. He once said, I feel like I am still in the world, but the world has forgotten me. For months, he lived like this, surrounded by memories, but disconnected from meaning. Then one day, something small but powerful happened. His young grandson visited him during holidays. The boy asked a simple question. Nana, why do you always look sad when you are alone? Mr. Raman paused. For the first time, he didn't give a philosophical answer. Instead, he spoke honestly. Because I feel I have no one. The child innocently replied, But Nana, don't you have yourself? That simple sentence struck him deeply. Not because it was profound, but because it was true. That night, Mr. Raman could not sleep. He kept thinking, have I been ignoring the only person who has never left me? Myself. The next morning, something shifted. He did not change his life outside. He changed his attention inside. He began reading again, not for exams, but for joy. He started gardening. He started teaching neighborhood children without charging anything. Slowly, his empty house began to feel like a living space again. He later said something very beautiful. I was not lonely because I was alone. I was lonely because I had abandoned myself. This is the real realization. Loneliness is not the absence of people, it is the absence of connection with yourself. Solitude, on the other hand, is when you become your own friend. You start enjoying your thoughts instead of fearing them. You start listening to your inner world instead of escaping it. In spiritual understanding, solitude is not isolation, it is integration. It is when your external silence becomes your internal harmony. Mr. Raman did not gain new people in his life, but he gained something deeper, he gained himself back. And that is why, in old age, the real question is not who is with me. The real question is, am I with myself? Because when you are truly with yourself, even an empty room feels full. 3. The strength you never discovered earlier, inner power in your 80s. There is a quiet misconception that strength belongs to youth. We often associate strength with strong muscles, fast walking, loud confidence, and the ability to handle physical challenges. But life has a deeper definition of strength, one that becomes most visible in the 80s when the body slows down, but the spirit begins to speak louder. At this stage of life, strength is no longer about what you can carry with your hands. It is about what you can carry in your heart without breaking. Let me tell you a simple story. There was an elderly man living in a small town in Kerala. His name was Krishnan. He lived alone after his wife passed away and his children settled in different cities. His house was modest, his routine was simple, and his life was quiet. Every morning he would wake up before sunrise, not because he had to, but because he chose to. He would sweep his courtyard, prepare his own tea, and sit outside listening to the sounds of nature. After that, he would cycle slowly to the nearby temple, even though many people suggested he stop cycling due to his age. One day, a young visitor asked him, Uncle, aren't you afraid of living alone at this age? Krishnan smiled gently and replied, I have lived with people all my life. Now I am finally learning to live with myself. That sentence carries deep wisdom, because what he was really saying was this. Strength is not about dependence, but about inner stability. Many people assume that living alone in old age is a weakness, but for Krishnan, it became an opportunity. He began discovering abilities he never noticed before: emotional patience, mental clarity, and a calm acceptance of life as it is. He no longer reacted to everything. He began observing everything. And that shift, reaction to observation, is where true strength is born. In spiritual terms, strength is not resistance. Strength is resilience. It is the ability to remain steady even when life changes its form around you. Krishnan's life teaches us something important. When external support reduces, internal support must grow. He did not become strong because life was easy. He became strong because life became simple enough for him to see himself clearly. In our younger years, we often measure strength by achievements, income, or social status. But in old age, strength is measured by peace. Can you sit alone without feeling abandoned? Can you wake up without fear of emptiness? Can you face silence without running away from it? If yes, then you are stronger than you think. Krishnan's cycling is symbolic. It was not about physical movement. It was about inner movement, moving forward in life with acceptance, not resistance. And slowly, people in his town began to notice something unusual. While others his age were complaining about loneliness, he was smiling at small things: a cup of tea, a morning breeze, a temple bell. That is real strength, not the strength that dominates the world, but the strength that remains undisturbed by it. Because when you stop depending on constant company to feel complete, you discover something beautiful: you were never incomplete to begin with. 4. Turning memories into companions, not chains. One of the most emotional parts of living alone in your 80s is learning how to live with memories. At this age, memories do not visit occasionally, they live with you every single day. A chair reminds you of someone. An old song opens forgotten emotions. Even the smell of tea can suddenly bring back a moment from 30 years ago. And this is where many elderly people suffer quietly. Because memories can become either companions or chains. They can comfort you or they can imprison you. The choice depends on how you hold them. There was an elderly woman named Kamala living alone in Jaipur after losing her husband of 53 years. For months after his passing, she could not touch his belongings. His glasses remained near the bedside. His favorite shawl still hung behind the door. Every corner of the house whispered his name. Visitors often told her, "You must move on." But grief does not work like a switch. The heart takes time to reorganize itself after love disappears physically. Kamala spent many evenings sitting quietly beside her husband's photograph. Sometimes she cried, sometimes she smiled, sometimes she simply stared in silence. One afternoon, her granddaughter noticed a notebook beside her and asked, "Daddy, what are you writing?" Kamala smiled softly and said, "I write letters to your grandfather every day." The little girl looked confused. "But he cannot read them," Kamala replied. "Maybe not with eyes, but love always finds a way to listen." That simple practice slowly transformed her life. Every morning, she wrote one page. Some days she wrote about old memories. Some days she expressed anger about being left alone. Some days she simply described the weather. But through writing, she stopped suppressing her emotions. Her memories stopped becoming wounds and started becoming conversations. This is the beauty of emotional healing. Pain becomes dangerous only when it remains trapped inside. Many people think strength means forgetting the past, but true healing is not forgetting. True healing is remembering without collapsing. Kamala did not erase her memories. She learned to carry them differently. Over time, she began smiling more. She started cooking again. She even began teaching devotional songs to children in her neighborhood. Her husband's absence still existed, but it no longer controlled her entire emotional world. And that is an important lesson. The people we love may leave physically, but love itself does not leave. Memories are proof that your life was touched by meaning, connection, and care. In spiritual understanding, attachment creates suffering when we refuse to accept change. But love becomes wisdom when we allow memories to soften us instead of hardening us. Kamala once said something deeply beautiful. "Earlier, my memories pulled me backward. Now they walk beside me." That is the transformation. Living alone in your 80s does not mean living without love. Sometimes it means carrying love in a quieter form. So never be ashamed of your memories. Honor them, speak to them, learn from them, but do not build a prison inside them. Because memories are meant to remind you that you have lived, loved, sacrificed, laughed, cried, and mattered deeply in someone's life. And that itself is a blessing many people never experience. 5. The secret joy of small things, discovering happiness again in your 80s. One of the greatest misunderstandings about happiness is that it must come from something big. In our younger years, we often believe joy lies in achievements, wealth, recognition, or exciting experiences. We keep chasing larger goals, thinking that one day, after everything is complete, we will finally feel peaceful. But life has a very gentle way of correcting this misunderstanding, especially in old age. When people begin living alone in their 80s, they slowly realize that happiness was never hidden in extraordinary moments. It was quietly waiting inside ordinary things all along. There was an 81-year-old man named Harish living in a small town in Gujarat. After retirement and after losing many close friends over the years, his life became extremely simple. His children lived in different cities and most of his days were spent alone. At first, he thought simplicity was emptiness. He believed life had become smaller. But gradually, he began noticing something surprising. Every morning, he watered the plants outside his home. He knew each plant almost like a family member. He spoke to them softly while pouring water. After that, he prepared tea and sat near the gate watching people pass by. Some mornings he fed stray dogs. Some evenings he listened to old songs from a small radio beside his chair. One day, a neighbor asked him, "Don't you get bored living the same routine every day?" Harish smiled and replied, "Earlier, I chased big happiness. Now, I collect small happiness." That sentence carries enormous wisdom. Because true peace does not come from intensity, it comes from attention. The problem is not that life lacks joy. The problem is that our minds become too distracted to notice it. In younger years, we rush through everything. We drink tea while checking phones. We eat food while worrying about tomorrow. We meet people while thinking about work. But old age, especially when living alone, can become a sacred opportunity to slow down enough to actually experience life. Harish began appreciating things he once ignored: the sound of rain, the warmth of sunlight entering his room, the comfort of folded blankets, the laughter of children playing outside, even the silence of early mornings. These moments may look small from the outside, but spiritually they are very large, because joy is not measured by size, it is measured by presence. Many elderly people suffer because they keep comparing their present life to their younger years. But comparison steals gratitude. When you stop comparing, even simple moments become meaningful again. Harish was not rich. He did not travel the world. He did not live a glamorous life. Yet people noticed something unique about him. He looked peaceful. Why? Because he stopped demanding that life constantly entertain him. Instead, he started participating fully in small experiences. That is the secret. Happiness in your 80s is not about doing extraordinary things. It is about experiencing ordinary things extraordinarily well. And when you learn this art, loneliness slowly loses its power. A cup of tea becomes comfort. A morning walk becomes meditation. A short conversation becomes connection. A quiet evening becomes gratitude. And suddenly life no longer feels empty. It feels enough.